So everything in a computer application executes from the beginning to the end. That's great for simple, trivial applications, but in more complex applications, we need to branch the code. We need to execute a certain part of the code if this condition is true. We need to execute another part of the code if that condition is true. This is called branching the code. And we do that by controlling the flow of the code. And that in PHP is done with an if statement. The simplest form is done with an if statement. If this user is a returning customer, then do this. If it's not a returning customer, then we just skip the code inside of the if block. But notice that we have this block of code that we're controlling the execution of. Everything within the braces of the if block is code that will only execute if the condition of the if is met. So everything after the if gets executed as normal. So the if would flow, and everything, whether it executes the if block or not, everything beneath the if block will continue to execute as normal. Well, what if we had multiple conditions for the same situation? So if the user is a returning customer, then do this. If it's not a returning customer, then I want it to do that. I want to go to the login page, or I want to go to the become a customer page, register page. So I could do this with this construct to control the flow of execution, if else. And notice again the braces that are marking these blocks of code that will get executed based on the condition. So if something is true, and again we could negate that, so if something is false, whatever the condition is, if that condition is met, then the code within the if braces will execute. If it's not met, then everything within the else block braces will execute. And then once either of those execute, one of them is going to execute. Once one of them executes, the code following the if construct executes. Well, what if we have even more conditions? Well, that's the if-else-if construct. And so we can have these stacked as deeply as we need to catch every possible condition that exists for making decisions within the application. There is no limit to the depth of the if-else-if statement. One of those three, and it could be 30, but one of those three in this example, one of those three blocks of code is going to execute. Either the first condition is satisfied and that first block will execute, or the second condition is satisfied and that block will execute. And by default, if none of the conditions are met, then the else block will execute. Well, this can get very messy. So there is a school of thought that says that the switch statement is a cleaner approach to having a test for multiple conditions rather than a deeply nested if-else construct. That's arguable because they both do exactly the same thing. Functionally, they do exactly the same thing. So again, this is one of those PHP program language lawyer kind of debates where which one is better. Neither. Functionally, they are both exactly the same. Here we have the switch statement that has some value, a variable. And then we have all of the case statements. So then the switch construct takes the value that it's given and compares it to all of the values in the case statement list until it finds one that is true. When it finds that true value, it executes the code block beneath that case statement. And if none of them are true, then it will execute the default code block. So it's a nice construct. I wouldn't argue against using it. I'm just saying that if you're more comfortable with the else if else, then use it. If you're more comfortable with the switch, use it. Functionally, they are identical. Okay, let's go look at some code. Okay, so we're going to look at the if, else if, and the switch statement. And here's just a little web page that tests for the value of this additive statement, 3 plus 2. And notice that I've put parentheses around there. It wasn't necessary to put the parentheses, but again, I want my code to be absolutely clear in what I am trying to do. In this case, I want to add 3 plus 2, and then I want to compare that value. I want to say, is the value, the resulting value of that addition, equal to 5? And if so, then I would like to echo this statement. Then I do a series of tests using an if-else-if construct where I ask the same question, only this time I ask, is 3 plus 2 equals to 1? Well, that should never be true, so we should never get this line of output. Same thing with 3 plus 2 equals 2. That's never true. We should never get that output. But we drop through one if, an else if, and then we go to the third else if. And in this third else if, 3 plus 2 is equal to 5, so we should get this statement. Now we do the same thing with the switch statement, and in the switch statement I ask the question. I say, take this value, 3 plus 2, and check it against all of the defined cases within this switch block. Again, notice the blocks. I just want to point this out. These are braces. So each of the if blocks is defined by a brace. The else if is defined by a brace. The switch block is defined by a brace. So we ask, in this switch block, look at the value of 3 plus 2, do that math, take that value and compare it to all of the case statements that you have and execute the code associated with the case statement that matches that. Well, 3 plus 2 does not equal 1, does not equal 2, does not equal 3, so we should never get any of this code executed. So we don't have a match. So we say, okay, well, the default output that I want you to give is down here. So if nothing matches, this gets executed by default. And certainly here, let me reload this. So certainly here we see it in our first if statement. We get 3 plus 2 does equal 5. Then we have this if-else if construct, and 3 plus 2 equals 5 here as well, so the universe is in balance, and we're in the second if statement. But then down here in the switch, we did 3 tests, none of which yielded a true, none of which satisfied the condition. Therefore, we dropped into the default statement, and that is what we got in the output. So everything worked as expected. You can see that the if-else if construct, we could have added an else statement here, and in this else statement we could say echo there is no match in the if-else if blocks. We could say that, and then we could change this so that there is no match, and let's execute that, and you can see the change that there is no match. So by adding this else statement, this final else statement, we failed the blocks here from the if, this else if, this else if. Then we go, as a default, we go to this output in the else. So that mimics the same behavior in the switch statement. We do tests, we fail them all, we go and drop into a default execution branch. So as you can see, functionally these constructs are identical, and it comes down to style and preference. So when you get out into the PHP world and you start debating echo versus print, you can add to that debate if, else versus the switch case default statements. Okay, so we're going to do an exercise where we're going to create a web page that's going to test a username and password. Let's store the username and password in variables in the code, and then test those passwords against the values Kirk for the username and prime directive for the password. If the values match, then print this string, live long and prosper. And if they don't match, then please try again.